No doctor could wake the coma CEO, not the best specialists, not the most advanced machines, not even millions of dollars in treatment. But the instant a poor student's rare blue blood touched him, the impossible happened. For 93 days, Billionaire CEO Ethan Blackwood lay trapped in a coma while doctors failed one after another. Across the city, struggling student Daniel Reed fought poverty and cared for his sick mother, unaware that a secret hidden in his blood would change everything. Then one unexpected touch sent the CEO's monitors into chaos. Doctors froze. Nurses stared. And the man who hadn't moved for months suddenly showed signs of life. But why did the poor student's blue blood succeed where every doctor failed? How was he connected to the coma CEO? And why did some people look terrified instead of relieved when the billionaire began to wake? The answers were buried in a 22-year-old betrayal that someone would kill to keep hidden. For 93 days, the most powerful man in the city lay trapped between life and death. Inside St. Augustine Medical Center, machines breathed for Ethan Blackwood while silence filled the luxury hospital suite built especially for him. Through the glass walls, nurses moved carefully, aware that the unconscious patient before them was not an ordinary man. Ethan Blackwood was the founder of Blackwood Technologies, a global empire worth over $30 billion. His innovations had transformed industries. Thousands of employees depended on him. Entire markets reacted whenever he made a decision. Now he could not even open his eyes. The rhythmic beeping of monitors echoed through the room as Dr. Harrison reviewed another disappointing report. "No neurological improvement," he said quietly. A woman standing near the bed lowered her head. Vanessa Cole, Ethan's elegant fiancée, dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. "Please don't stop trying," she whispered. Dr. Harrison nodded sympathetically. "We won't." Standing farther back was Ethan's younger brother, Victor Blackwood. Unlike Ethan, who had built wealth through vision and hard work, Victor had spent most of his life living in his brother's shadow. His tailored suit, luxury watch, and carefully rehearsed concern disguised something darker. "Whatever it costs," Victor said solemnly, "my brother deserves the best." But as the doctor turned away, Victor's eyes briefly drifted toward the company documents tucked beneath his arm. A quick glance. Gone in a second. Yet nurse Emily noticed it. For weeks she had observed strange things. Missing files. Unexpected visitors. Medication, logs altered after midnight. Small details that seemed meaningless alone, but unsettling together. She couldn't prove anything. Not yet. On Ethan's bedside table sat an old photograph that no family member ever mentioned. A younger Ethan stood beside a smiling woman with bright eyes and simple clothes. Unlike the billionaire's polished public image, this version of Ethan looked genuinely happy. Every evening nurse, Emily found herself staring at that picture. "Who are you?" she quietly wondered. No one answered. Far away across the city, 19-year-old Daniel Reed finished mopping the floor of a grocery store after completing classes at college. His worn sneakers were falling apart. His backpack had been stitched together more than once. Yet despite exhaustion, he hurried home. His mother would be waiting. The small apartment where Daniel lived with Sarah Reed looked nothing like Ethan's penthouse overlooking the city skyline. Paint peeled from the walls. Bills sat stacked on the kitchen table. Still, Sarah greeted him with a smile. "You're late again." "I picked up another shift," Daniel replied. "You need rest." "We need rent." Sarah's smile faded. She hated watching her son work so hard. As Daniel prepared dinner, Sarah quietly studied him. A flash of memory crossed her mind. 22 years earlier. A young businessman promising her forever. A broken promise. A vanished future. And a newborn son she raised alone. Her fingers tightened around an old necklace she always kept hidden. A necklace engraved with the letter B. Daniel noticed. You always hold that thing when you're worried. Sarah quickly tucked it away. It's nothing. But it wasn't nothing. For years, she had protected secrets that could change Daniel's life forever. Secrets connected to a man she believed had abandoned them. As Daniel headed to his room, Sarah called after him. Daniel. Yes. Her eyes softened. Never forget this. Your blood carries a purpose. Daniel laughed. Mom, you've said that my whole life. One day you'll understand. Daniel shook his head and smiled before disappearing down the hallway. But Sarah didn't smile back. Fear lingered in her eyes. Because she knew something Daniel didn't. And somewhere inside a hospital room across the city, the unconscious billionaire connected to that secret remained trapped in darkness. For now, Daniel Reed's alarm rang at 4:45 a.m. Most college students were still asleep, but Daniel's day had already begun. He quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake his mother. The small apartment was cold. The heater had stopped working weeks ago, and repairing it was a luxury they could not afford. After preparing breakfast, he placed a plate beside Sarah's bedroom door. Mom, your medicine is on the table, he called softly. I heard you, Sarah replied, and don't forget your exam today. Daniel smiled. You remember everything. That's a mother's job. But after he left, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, staring at an old wooden box hidden beneath her mattress. For years she had kept it locked. Inside were photographs, letters, and memories she had never shown Daniel. At the very top was a picture of a young Ethan Blackwood. Handsome, ambitious, smiling. The same smile Daniel unknowingly carried. Sarah gently touched the photograph. A wave of memories flooded back. 22 years earlier, Ethan had not been a billionaire. He was a rising entrepreneur with dreams bigger than his bank account. He had spent long evenings talking with Sarah about the future they would build together. A house, a family, a life. He had even shown her a ring. Then, without warning, he vanished. The pain of that disappearance still lived inside her. Sarah closed the box before the memories overwhelmed her. Across the city, Daniel rushed through crowded streets toward campus. His classmates admired him. Not because he was wealthy. Not because he was popular. But because he never gave up. How do you do it? His friend Marcus asked during lunch. Do what? Study full-time, work 2 jobs, and still score higher than everyone else. Daniel laughed. I don't have a choice. Marcus shook his head. You're going places, man. Daniel smiled, but deep down he wasn't so sure. Every day felt like survival. Every bill felt like a mountain. What he didn't know was that his determination came from more than hard work. Somewhere in his DNA lived traits inherited from a father he had never met. The same calm leadership. The same resilience under pressure. The same instinct to protect others before himself. Traits that would soon become impossible to ignore. That afternoon, after classes ended, Daniel headed to St. Augustine Medical Center for his volunteer shift. The hospital partnered with local colleges, offering students experience and small stipends. Daniel needed every dollar. As he entered the building, something strange happened. His eyes drifted toward a large digital screen displaying hospital news. At the center of the screen was a familiar face. Ethan Blackwood. The sleeping billionaire remains in critical condition, the headline read. For reasons he couldn't explain, Daniel stopped walking. A strange feeling settled over him. Not recognition. Not memory. Something deeper. Something that made him stare a few seconds longer than necessary. You okay? Another volunteer asked. Daniel blinked. Yeah, I don't know why. It just feels like I've seen him before. The volunteer laughed. Everyone's seen him before. He's famous. Daniel nodded and continued walking. But as he disappeared down the hallway, the camera mounted above Ethan Blackwood's hospital room briefly captured something unusual. The moment Daniel entered the building, Ethan's heart monitor showed a tiny, unexpected fluctuation. Just one. A small change no one noticed. No one except Nurse Emily. She frowned at the screen, then at the hallway, then back at the monitor. A seed of suspicion quietly planted itself in her mind. And somewhere else in the hospital, hidden from everyone, Victor Blackwood received a message on his phone. A security alert. Someone new had entered the building. Ordinarily, it meant nothing. But when Victor glanced at the image attached to the alert, his confident expression faded for a split second. The young volunteer's face looked disturbingly familiar. Too familiar. Victor stared at the photo, then whispered words no one was supposed to hear. "No, that's impossible." And for the first time in 93 days, genuine fear touched his eyes. Victor Blackwood could not stop staring at the security photo. The young volunteer's face haunted him long after he left the hospital. Inside his luxury penthouse overlooking the city, he sat alone in his private office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows, priceless artwork, and evidence of a life built on wealth and influence. Yet despite all the luxury around him, unease crept into his chest. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. The jawline, the eyes, even the way the young man carried himself. For a brief moment, Victor felt as though he were looking at a younger version of Ethan. "No," he muttered, "it can't be." But deep down, an old fear was beginning to wake. A fear buried for 22 years. Victor immediately picked up his phone. "I want everything on that student," he ordered a private investigator. "Family, education, medical records, friends, everything." "What's his name?" Victor looked at the report. Daniel Reed. The investigator promised results by morning. After ending the call, Victor poured himself a drink. His hands trembled slightly. That almost never happened. Because Victor remembered something nobody else knew. 22 years earlier, he had stood outside a hospital room listening to Sarah Reed tell Ethan she was pregnant. Victor had never intended to eavesdrop. But what he heard changed everything. At the time, Ethan was already showing signs of extraordinary success. Investors loved him. New contracts arrived weekly. The future looked limitless. And Victor knew exactly what would happen next. If Ethan married Sarah and had a child, that child would inherit everything. Victor would always remain second. Forgotten. Overshadowed. The resentment that had grown inside him for years slowly transformed into something dangerous. Something poisonous. The memory faded as Victor stared out at the city lights. Meanwhile, across town, Sarah Reed sat alone at her kitchen table after Daniel left for his evening shift. The apartment was silent. She opened the wooden box once again. Inside lay a stack of old letters tied together with a faded ribbon. Letters Ethan had written. Letters she had never thrown away despite the pain they carried. One particular letter caught her attention. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting instantly transported her back 22 years. A younger Ethan sat beside her on a park bench overlooking a lake. "You know what I love about you?" he had asked. Sarah laughed. "Everything. Besides everything." "What?" "You believe in me before anyone else does." Young Ethan had looked at her with complete sincerity. "One day I'll build something great, Sarah, but even if I become rich, I never want money to change who I am." The memory warmed her heart and broke it at the same time. Because the Ethan she remembered was not capable of abandonment. Yet he had disappeared. Or so she believed. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Daniel. He entered carrying groceries. "Guess what?" he said. "What?" "The hospital assigned me to a new volunteer project tomorrow." Sarah smiled. That's wonderful. It's near the VIP medical wing. For reasons she couldn't explain, a chill ran through her. The VIP wing. Yeah. Sarah's fingers tightened around the old letter. An uncomfortable feeling settled in her stomach. Almost like a warning. Almost like fate was quietly moving pieces into place. Later that night, inside St. Augustine Medical Center, Nurse Emily reviewed Ethan's charts again. The unusual monitor fluctuation from earlier still bothered her. She compared timestamps. Her eyes widened. The brief spike had occurred at the exact moment Daniel Reed entered the building. Coincidence? Probably. Yet something told her not to ignore it. As she closed the file, she noticed something else. A section of Ethan's medical records had been accessed shortly after the fluctuation. By someone with executive authorization. Victor Blackwood. Emily frowned. Why would he be looking at this now? She didn't know it yet, but she had just stumbled onto the first thread of a conspiracy much larger than she imagined. And while she searched for answers, Victor sat awake in his penthouse, waiting for the investigator's report. Because if Daniel Reed was who Victor feared he might be, then a secret buried for 22 years was about to rise from the grave. And this time, it could destroy everything. The investigator's report arrived at exactly 6:00 a.m. Victor Blackwood opened the encrypted file before his first cup of coffee. As he scanned the information, his heartbeat quickened. Name, Daniel Reed. Age, 19. Mother, Sarah Reed. Victor froze. The coffee cup slipped slightly in his hand. A few drops spilled across his desk. For several seconds, he simply stared at Sarah's name. The past had finally caught up with him. Impossible, he whispered. But the evidence sitting before him was very real. The report included photographs of Daniel leaving college, working part-time jobs, and caring for his mother. The investigator had unknowingly captured something Victor wished he had never seen. The young man's face. The resemblance to Ethan was becoming impossible to dismiss. Not identical, but unmistakable. The same eyes. The same determined expression. The same habit of helping strangers without expecting anything in return. Traits Victor had spent decades watching in his older brother. A cold sweat formed on his forehead. For the first time in years, fear outweighed ambition. Meanwhile, several miles away, Daniel arrived at St. Augustine Medical Center for his volunteer shift. The hospital bustled with activity. Doctors rushed through hallways. Patients filled waiting rooms. Machines beeped constantly. Daniel checked in and received his assignment. Today's project is in the VIP wing, the supervisor said. Got it. As he pushed a supply cart through unfamiliar corridors, he noticed increased security. Private guards stood outside certain rooms. Executives came and went. Everyone seemed tense. Then Daniel passed a large glass wall. Inside lay Ethan Blackwood, the sleeping billionaire. For reasons he could not explain, Daniel slowed his pace. His eyes locked onto the unconscious man. A strange ache stirred inside him. Not sadness. Not sympathy. Something deeper. Something almost familiar. Behind him, Nurse Emily noticed. First time seeing him, she asked. Daniel nodded. Yeah. What do you think? Daniel studied Ethan carefully. He looks lonely. Emily blinked. Most people spoke about Ethan's wealth. His power. His company. No one ever said he looked lonely. Yet somehow Daniel's answer felt right. Neither of them noticed the monitor beside Ethan's bed. For 2 brief seconds, the rhythm changed again. Then returned to normal. Another clue. Another thread. Another mystery waiting to be understood. Across town, Sarah sat alone with the wooden box open before her. Today, unlike other days, she allowed herself to revisit the memories she spent years trying to bury. The flashback unfolded vividly. 22 years earlier, she and Ethan had been inseparable. Back then, Ethan owned a small startup, operating from a cramped office. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't famous. He was simply a young man with enormous dreams. One evening, after closing the office, Ethan had taken Sarah to a quiet hill overlooking the city. The skyline glowed in the distance. "I'll build something incredible one day," Ethan had said. Sarah smiled. "I know. You never doubt me." "Should I?" He laughed. "Maybe." Then he reached into his pocket. Not with a ring. Not yet. But with a small silver necklace engraved with the letter B. "When I can afford the real thing, I'll buy you the biggest diamond in the city." Sarah laughed. "This is enough. It won't be forever." The memory softened her expression. Then came another memory. A much darker one. The day she discovered she was pregnant. The joy. The excitement. The plans they made. And then, silence. Calls unanswered. Messages ignored. Days becoming weeks. Weeks becoming months. The heartbreak had nearly destroyed her. What Sarah never knew was that Ethan had been desperately trying to reach her during that same period. Someone had made sure neither of them received the other's messages. The foundation of the entire tragedy remained hidden. For now, back at the hospital, Victor arrived unexpectedly. He stood outside Ethan's room and watched Daniel working nearby. The resemblance struck him harder than ever. A terrible realization formed in his mind. If Ethan woke up, if Sarah reappeared, if the truth surfaced, everything Victor had stolen could vanish. And for the first time, he began considering options far more dangerous than deception. As Daniel pushed his cart down the hallway, completely unaware of the storm gathering around him, Ethan's fingers twitched ever so slightly beneath the hospital blanket. The movement lasted less than a second. No one saw it. No one except Victor. And the fear in his eyes grew even deeper. Victor Blackwood did not sleep that night. The image of Daniel Reed haunted him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the young man's face standing beside Ethan's hospital bed. The resemblance was becoming impossible to dismiss, and worse, Ethan's sudden finger movement had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. For 93 days, Ethan had shown no meaningful response. Then Daniel appeared. And now strange things were happening. Victor sat in his office inside Blackwood Technologies' headquarters, 70 floors above the city. Through the glass walls stretched a skyline he had spent years dreaming would someday belong to him. But it was never truly his. Everything carried Ethan's name. Ethan's legacy. Ethan's success. Victor's resentment had begun in childhood. Even as boys, Ethan excelled at everything. Teachers praised him. Their parents admired him. Investors trusted him. Victor always came second. What started as jealousy slowly evolved into bitterness. And bitterness eventually became something much darker. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. His personal assistant entered. "The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Victor nodded. As the assistant turned to leave, Victor stopped him. "I need a favor." "Anything, sir." "I want additional security restrictions around Ethan's medical wing." The assistant looked confused. "Because of media attention." Victor forced a smile. "Exactly. But media attention wasn't the reason. He wanted fewer eyes watching what happened around Ethan. Especially Daniel. Meanwhile, Nurse Emily sat in the hospital archives reviewing records she wasn't technically assigned to review. Her instincts refused to let go of the strange pattern she had discovered. Daniel enters the building. Ethan's monitor changes. Daniel passes Ethan's room. Another fluctuation. Victor accesses medical records immediately afterward. Nothing made sense, yet all of it felt connected. As she searched older files, another irregularity appeared. Months before Ethan's collapse, several toxicology reports had been requested, but later removed from the system. Removed. Not lost. Removed. Emily frowned. Why would anyone delete those? The question lingered in her mind. Across the hospital, Daniel continued his volunteer duties. His shift supervisor approached him. "Daniel, we need help transporting supplies to the private research unit." "No problem." The route took him deeper into the VIP wing than ever before. As he pushed the cart down a quiet corridor, he passed Ethan's room again. This time, the door stood slightly open. Daniel glanced inside. The sight stirred something unexpected. The billionaire looked peaceful. Not powerful. Not intimidating. Just human. Alone. Without thinking, Daniel stepped closer. Inside the room sat the framed photograph nurse Emily had noticed weeks earlier. Daniel's eyes drifted toward it. The young woman standing beside Ethan looked strangely familiar. He couldn't explain why. He had never seen her before. Yet something about her face felt important. A tiny spark of recognition flickered deep inside him. Then his phone rang. The moment passed. He answered and continued walking. Far across town, Sarah suddenly dropped a glass while washing dishes. It shattered on the floor. She stared at the broken pieces. An uneasy feeling settled over her. For years, she had experienced these moments whenever something significant was about to happen. The same feeling had struck her the day Daniel was born. The same feeling had struck her the day Ethan vanished. And now it had returned. Back at the hospital, Victor reviewed security footage from the VIP wing. His jaw tightened. Daniel had been standing outside Ethan's room. Too close. Far too close. Victor picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Move up the timeline." The voice on the other end hesitated. "Are you sure?" Victor looked at Ethan's unconscious face displayed on the monitor. Then at Daniel's image frozen on the screen beside it. "Yes," he said coldly. "We're running out of time." After ending the call, Victor stared through the window. A dangerous decision had just been made. He believed he was protecting everything he had worked for. What he didn't realize was that fate was already moving faster than he could. Because less than 24 hours remained before the poor student and the coma CEO would finally come into direct contact. And when that happened, nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning began like any other. At least, that was what everyone believed. Neither Daniel Reed nor Sarah Reed knew that the day ahead would unravel secrets buried for more than 2 decades. At St. Augustine Medical Center, preparations were underway for a major charity fundraiser. Wealthy donors, business executives, politicians, and media personalities would gather to support the hospital's research programs. The event had one special attraction. Guests would be allowed to view the famous VIP wing, where billionaire Ethan Blackwood continued his fight for survival. Hospital administrators hoped the publicity would generate millions in donations. Daniel had been assigned as one of the student volunteers helping with logistics. "Big day," Marcus said as they unloaded supplies. Daniel laughed. "Big for everyone, except the volunteers doing all the work. You should be grateful." "I am." But beneath the joke, Daniel looked exhausted. He had barely slept. His mother's worried expression from the previous night kept replaying in his mind. Meanwhile, across town, Sarah sat at the kitchen table sorting through old paperwork. One envelope slipped from the wooden box and landed on the floor. She frowned. She didn't remember seeing it before. The envelope had become trapped beneath a false lining inside the box. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was an old letter, addressed to her. The handwriting belonged to Ethan. Her breath caught. This wasn't one of the letters she had kept. This was one she had never received. The date on the envelope stopped her cold. It had been written shortly after she discovered she was pregnant. Tears filled her eyes as she unfolded it. The words blurred before she could even finish the first paragraph. "Sarah, I don't understand why you suddenly stopped answering me. I've been trying to reach you every day. If I've done something wrong, please tell me. I love you. I want our child. I want our future." Sarah covered her mouth. No. Her heart pounded violently. The letter continued. "I'll keep searching for you until I find you." The room spun around her. For 22 years, she had believed Ethan abandoned her. For 22 years, she had carried that wound. But this letter suggested something impossible. Ethan had never left. Someone had separated them. The realization shattered everything she thought she knew. Back at the hospital, Nurse Emily made a discovery of her own. While reviewing deleted toxicology records, she uncovered fragments of an old laboratory report. Most of the file had been erased, but one detail remained. Trace neurotoxins detected. Emily stared at the screen. Her pulse quickened. If the report was accurate, Ethan's coma wasn't natural. Someone may have caused it. The implications terrified her. Elsewhere, Victor Blackwood arrived at the fundraiser wearing a flawless smile. Guests greeted him warmly. Investors shook his hand. Reporters asked questions. He played the role perfectly. But beneath the polished appearance, anxiety consumed him. His hired operative had already entered the hospital. The man's assignment was simple. Monitor Daniel Reed. Prevent complications. Victor didn't specify exactly how. He didn't need to. As the fundraiser grew busier, volunteers rushed through crowded hallways carrying equipment and supplies. Daniel was among them. His route repeatedly brought him near the VIP wing. Near Ethan. Near Destiny. As afternoon turned into evening, dozens of guests gathered near the restricted corridor for a guided presentation. Nurses moved carefully through the crowd. Doctors carried medical samples between departments. The hospital buzzed with activity. And then the first domino fell. A nurse carrying several sealed blood vials hurried around a corner. Someone accidentally stepped into her path. She stumbled. The tray tilted. Several people gasped. The vials slipped from her hands. Daniel instinctively moved forward, trying to help, trying to prevent the accident. None of them realized that one of those vials belonged to Ethan Blackwood. And none of them knew that the next few seconds would trigger a chain reaction capable of changing multiple lives forever. Across the city, Sarah suddenly looked up from Ethan's forgotten letter. A chill raced through her body. The same feeling returned, stronger than ever, as though fate itself had finally reached the moment it had been waiting 22 years to deliver. And inside St. Augustine Medical Center, the falling vial was only inches from the floor. Time seemed to slow. The blood vial struck the polished hospital floor. Glass exploded in every direction. Several people jumped back. A nurse screamed. The tray crashed beside her. Daniel reacted purely on instinct. Without thinking about his own safety, he lunged forward to help the fallen nurse before anyone else moved. "Are you hurt?" he asked. I think so." As he reached down to steady her, a sharp fragment of glass sliced across his palm. Daniel winced. A thin line of blood appeared instantly. At the same moment, droplets from the shattered vial splashed onto his injured hand. Nobody paid attention. The accident seemed minor. Just another unexpected incident during a busy fundraiser. But destiny had just taken its first step. The nurse looked horrified. "Oh no, that sample belonged to Mr. Blackwood. Daniel glanced toward the crimson stain spreading across the floor. The CEO. Yes. Hospital staff immediately rushed forward. Someone called for cleanup. Someone else began collecting the remaining samples. Within seconds, the hallway became chaotic. Daniel grabbed a cloth and wrapped it around his hand. It's just a scratch, he assured them. But as he spoke, another volunteer hurried over. Daniel, we need help in Mr. Blackwood's room. One of the support carts is stuck. Daniel nodded. Coming. Unaware of what had just occurred, he followed the volunteer toward Ethan's suite. Inside the room, the billionaire remained motionless. Machines continued their endless rhythm. The room looked exactly as it had for 93 days. Silent. Hopeless. Unchanged. Or so everyone believed. Daniel entered, pushing a replacement equipment cart. As he maneuvered it into position, one wheel suddenly locked. The cart lurched sideways. Instinctively, Daniel reached out to stop himself from falling. His injured hand landed directly on Ethan Blackwood's wrist. The contact lasted only a second. Maybe two. Then everything changed. Beep. 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 The heart monitor suddenly accelerated. A sharp alarm erupted throughout the room. Daniel jumped backward. What happened? Nurses spun around. Doctors rushed toward the bed. Monitor readings began climbing. Brain activity surged across the screens. The room froze. For 93 days, those numbers had remained almost unchanged. Now they were moving. Rapidly. Get Dr. Harrison, a nurse shouted. Within seconds, people flooded the room. Doctors stared at the monitors in disbelief. This can't be right. Check the equipment. It's working. Run diagnostics. The machines were functioning perfectly, which meant the impossible was happening. Daniel stood against the wall, confused and overwhelmed. He had no idea why everyone was panicking. Then Nurse Emily noticed something. Her eyes shifted from Ethan to Daniel, then to the bandage wrapped around his hand. A chill ran through her. The timing was too precise. Far too precise. Meanwhile, Victor Blackwood was speaking with donors at the fundraiser when his phone rang. The caller ID showed the hospital. His smile disappeared. What is it? The voice on the other end sounded breathless. Sir, you need to come immediately. Victor's stomach tightened. What happened? There was a pause. Then words he never expected to hear. Your brother just showed signs of neurological response. The blood drained from Victor's face. For several seconds he couldn't speak. No, he whispered. Across the city, Sarah suddenly dropped Ethan's letter onto the table. Her heartbeat raced. An overwhelming feeling washed over her. Hope. Fear. Confusion. It was as though some invisible thread connecting distant lives had suddenly been pulled tight. Back inside the hospital room, the impossible continued unfolding. The monitors kept climbing. Doctors worked frantically. Nurses exchanged stunned glances. And then, in the middle of the chaos, Ethan Blackwood's fingers moved. Not a twitch. Not a reflex. A deliberate movement. Slow. Weak. But undeniable. The room fell silent. One nurse covered her mouth. Another began crying. After 93 days in a coma, the billionaire CEO had just moved. And standing only a few feet away was a poor student whose blood still stained the bandage on his hand. A student who had no idea that the miracle unfolding before him was connected to a secret buried 22 years in the past. A secret that was finally beginning to wake up alongside Ethan Blackwood. The news spread through St. Augustine Medical Center like wildfire. After 93 days of silence, Ethan Blackwood had moved. Doctors rushed from different departments. Specialists abandoned meetings. Administrators flooded the VIP wing. Within an hour, the corridor outside Ethan's room was packed with medical staff trying to understand what had happened. Inside the room, Dr. Harrison stared at the monitor readings in disbelief. "Reviewed hundreds of coma cases," he said. "I've never seen neurological activity spike this dramatically." Neither had anyone else. The timing was too exact, too sudden, too impossible. Nurse Emily stood quietly near the back of the room, replaying the sequence in her mind. Daniel enters the hospital. Ethan's monitor fluctuates. Daniel passes Ethan's room. Another fluctuation. Daniel touches Ethan. Massive neurological response. 3 separate incidents. 3 separate reactions. The pattern was no longer a coincidence. Her eyes slowly turned toward Daniel. The young student sat outside the room answering questions from hospital staff. He looked terrified. "What exactly happened?" a doctor asked. Daniel shook his head. "I don't know. The cart slipped. I touched his arm, then the alarm started." "Anything else happen?" No, the answer was truthful. Daniel genuinely had no idea, yet something extraordinary had clearly occurred. Later that evening, Dr. Harrison ordered a full review of everything surrounding the event. Blood samples, medical readings, environmental factors, witness statements, nothing could be overlooked. Meanwhile, Victor Blackwood arrived at the hospital. The moment he entered the VIP corridor, he knew things were spiraling out of control. Doctors looked excited. Nurses looked hopeful. Investors who had heard the news were already calling. Hope was returning, and hope was dangerous. Especially when Ethan waking up could destroy everything Victor had spent years building. He spotted Daniel sitting alone. For several moments, Victor simply watched him. The resemblance to Ethan now seemed impossible to ignore, not because they looked identical, but because of the small details, the posture, the expressions, the quiet confidence. Victor suddenly remembered another moment from 22 years earlier. A young Sarah Reed standing outside Ethan's office, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. Face glowing with happiness. "He's going to be a wonderful father," she had said. Victor remembered the panic those words created inside him, the fear, the jealousy, the realization that he could lose everything. The memory faded, his jaw tightened. He could not allow the past to return. Cross town, Sarah sat surrounded by old letters spread across her kitchen table. Hours earlier, she had discovered Ethan's hidden letter. Now she had found another, and another, and another. All of them told the same heartbreaking story. Ethan had written repeatedly, searching for her, begging for answers, trying desperately to find her. One letter made her break down completely. "Sarah, if you're angry, I'll wait. If you're hurt, I'll apologize. If you're scared, I'll protect you. But please don't disappear without telling me why." Tears rolled down her cheeks. For 22 years, she had believed he abandoned her. Yet every letter revealed the opposite. Someone had lied. Someone had interfered. Someone had destroyed their future. For the first time, Sarah began questioning everything. Back at the hospital, a laboratory technician entered Dr. Harrison's office carrying preliminary reports. "You need to see this." Doctor reviewed the results. His eyes widened. "What?" The blood sample from the student. "About it?" The technician hesitated. "It contains a genetic marker almost identical to Mr. Blackwood's." Silence filled the room. Dr. Harrison looked up slowly. "That's statistically impossible." "That's what I thought." Doctor stared at the report again. The odds of 2 unrelated individuals sharing such a rare marker were extraordinarily low, not impossible, but close. 1,000 questions immediately surfaced. Questions that would require answers. Questions that would eventually expose a secret buried for decades. Elsewhere in the hospital, Nurse Emily made a discovery even more alarming. The deleted toxicology report she had been investigating was not an accident. Someone had deliberately erased evidence. Evidence suggesting Ethan's coma may have been caused by a rare neurotoxin. A toxin that should never have been in his system. Emily's pulse quickened. If her suspicion was correct, then Ethan wasn't simply a patient. He was the victim of a crime, and if Ethan woke up, he might remember who did it. At that exact moment, Victor received a message from one of his private contacts. The hospital is conducting DNA-related testing. Victor's blood ran cold. His greatest fear was beginning to materialize, because if the tests continued, if Ethan regained consciousness, if Sarah Reed resurfaced, then the truth about Daniel's identity would finally emerge. And when it did, the empire Victor had spent 22 years trying to steal could collapse overnight. For the first time since Ethan entered the coma, Victor wasn't thinking about success. He was thinking about survival. The next 48 hours became the most intense period in St. Augustine Medical Center's history. Around the clock, doctors monitored Ethan Blackwood's condition. The billionaire remained unconscious, but everything had changed. His brain activity continued improving. His reflexes strengthened. His vital signs stabilized. For the first time in 93 days, the medical team genuinely believed he might wake up. Hope filled the hospital. But for Victor Blackwood, hope felt like a death sentence. Inside his penthouse, he paced restlessly across the marble floor while waiting for updates from his private contacts. Every improvement in Ethan's condition brought him closer to disaster. Because Ethan waking up wouldn't just threaten Victor's position. It could expose crimes he had hidden for years. The poison, the cover-up, the stolen future. And now there was Daniel, Victor's greatest nightmare. A living reminder of a secret that should have remained buried forever. His phone buzzed. A message from the investigator. DNA analysis in progress. High probability of close biological relationship. Victor nearly dropped the phone. No. The walls suddenly felt smaller. The room felt colder. For the first time in decades, he realized he might lose everything. Meanwhile, Sarah Reed stood frozen in her apartment. The table before her was covered with letters, photographs, old documents, pieces of a life stolen from her. The evidence was undeniable. Ethan had never abandoned her. He had fought for her, searched for her, loved her. All those years she had blamed him. All those years she had raised Daniel believing she had been discarded. And all those years someone had been lying. As she reread one particular letter, a folded document slipped from between the pages. It was a copy of a private investigator's report commissioned by Ethan 22 years earlier. The report ended abruptly. But one name appeared repeatedly. Victor Blackwood. Sarah's heart pounded. The pieces finally began fitting together. Victor had been involved. Perhaps from the very beginning. Tears streamed down her face. Not tears of sadness. Tears of lost time. 22 years. 22 birthdays. 22 years of father and son living separate lives. Gone. Stolen. At the hospital, Daniel sat beside Ethan's room after another long volunteer shift. He had become the center of attention, despite wanting nothing to do with the spotlight. Doctors continued asking questions. Researchers requested additional blood samples. Everyone seemed fascinated by him. Yet Daniel only cared about one thing. His mother. He called her. "How are you?" There was a long pause. "Mom." Sarah finally answered. "Daniel, I need to ask you something." "Okay." "Have you ever wondered about your father?" Daniel frowned. The question caught him off guard. "Sometimes." Another silence followed. Then Sarah spoke softly. "What if everything we believed was wrong?" Before Daniel could respond, Sarah ended the call. She looked at Ethan's photograph one final time. Then she made a decision. She grabbed her coat and headed for the door. It was time to learn the truth. Back inside the hospital, Dr. Harrison received the finalized genetic report. The moment he opened it, his eyes widened. The results were conclusive. Not probable. Not possible. Certain. He immediately sat down. The implications were staggering. The poor student and the billionaire CEO shared a biological relationship. A direct one. The mystery surrounding the rare blood marker suddenly made sense. The unusual reactions. The genetic similarities. The impossible medical response. Everything connected. Yet before Dr. Harrison could inform anyone, alarms suddenly erupted from Ethan's room. Doctors sprinted down the hallway. Nurses rushed after them. Daniel jumped to his feet. Inside the room, monitors flashed wildly. Ethan's brain activity had surged again, higher than ever before. His eyelids trembled. His fingers moved. His breathing changed. Everyone watched in stunned silence. "He may be coming out of it," one doctor whispered. Across the hallway, Victor arrived just in time to hear those words. Terror flooded his face. Because Ethan wasn't supposed to wake up. Not now. Not ever. And somewhere on the highway leading toward the hospital, Sarah Reed pressed harder on the accelerator. 22 years of unanswered questions were about to collide with the truth. Neither she nor Victor knew it yet. But within hours, Ethan Blackwood would open his eyes. And when he did, the first name he remembered would change everything. The entire hospital seemed to hold its breath. Doctors crowded around Ethan Blackwood's bed. Nurses stood frozen near the monitors. Hospital executives waited anxiously outside the room. And just beyond the glass doors stood Daniel Reed, unaware that his life was about to change forever. The monitor continued its steady rhythm. Ethan's eyelids trembled again. Then once more. A doctor leaned forward. "Mr. Blackwood, can you hear me?" For several seconds, nothing happened. Then slowly, painfully, Ethan's eyes opened. The room erupted into stunned silence. No one moved. No one spoke. After 95 days trapped inside darkness, the billionaire CEO was awake. Tears filled Nurse Emily's eyes. Dr. Harrison immediately began checking Ethan's responses. "Ethan, can you hear me?" A weak nod. "What year is it?" Ethan answered correctly. The doctors exchanged amazed glances. His memory appeared intact. Outside the room, Victor's face turned pale. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not after everything he had done. Not after all the precautions he had taken. Meanwhile, Sarah rushed through the hospital entrance. She barely noticed the shocked faces around her as she followed directions toward the VIP wing. Her heart pounded harder with every step. 22 years of pain. 22 years of questions. 22 years of believing a lie. The moment had finally arrived. Inside the room, Ethan's eyes slowly scanned the faces surrounding him. Doctors, nurses, hospital staff. Yet it was clear he was searching for someone else. Someone important. Someone he remembered before everything went dark. Then his gaze drifted beyond the doorway. Toward Daniel. For a moment, confusion filled Ethan's face. Then something changed. A memory. A resemblance. A realization. His eyes widened. His lips trembled. And with what little strength he had, Ethan whispered words that silenced the entire room. "Sarah." Everyone exchanged confused looks. Then he whispered again. "Where is Sarah?" At that exact moment, Sarah appeared in the doorway. Their eyes met. 22 years disappeared. The hospital room faded away. The crowd vanished. For a few seconds, it was only them. The young couple who had once dreamed about building a future together. The future that had been stolen from them. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "Ethan." Ethan stared at her in disbelief. "You didn't leave." Sarah shook her head. "No." The truth struck both of them simultaneously. Neither had abandoned the other. They had both been victims. Victims of manipulation. Victims of betrayal. Victims of a lie that lasted 22 years. Then Ethan's eyes shifted toward Daniel. His gaze lingered, studying him, recognizing things he couldn't explain. The resemblance, the familiar expressions, the connection he felt instinctively. A father's intuition, awakening after decades of silence. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. "Our son." Sarah nodded. "Yes." Daniel stood frozen. The room disappeared around him. The world seemed to stop. Every unanswered question from his life suddenly found an answer. Every empty Father's Day. Every moment of wondering. Every secret. Everything led to this. Ethan reached out a trembling hand. Daniel stepped forward and took it. For the second time, their hands touched. But this time, it wasn't a miracle waking a billionaire. It was a father finally finding his son. Around the room, nurses quietly wiped tears from their faces. Even Dr. Harrison looked emotional. Yet the reunion wasn't the only truth waiting to emerge. Ethan's expression suddenly hardened. Fragments of memory returned. The poisoning. The arguments. The betrayal. Victor. His eyes turned toward his younger brother, standing near the doorway. Immediately, Victor knew. Ethan remembered. The fear he'd been carrying for months finally became reality. "You," Ethan whispered. Victor took a step backward. "Ethan, I can explain." But there was nothing left to explain. Nurse Emily had already handed her evidence to authorities. The deleted toxicology reports. The altered medical records. The suspicious payments. Combined with Ethan's testimony, the truth surfaced quickly. Within hours, investigators arrived. Victor's empire of lies collapsed. As officers escorted him away, he looked at Ethan, Sarah, and Daniel standing together. The family he had spent 22 years keeping apart. The family he could never destroy. Weeks later, Ethan's recovery amazed doctors around the world. Researchers continued studying the rare biological interaction that had helped trigger his awakening. But for Ethan, the greatest miracle wasn't medical. It was personal. One evening, after leaving rehabilitation therapy, he sat beside Sarah and Daniel overlooking the city skyline. The same skyline he once dreamed of conquering. The same skyline he had conquered. Yet none of it mattered as much as the people beside him. "I spent years building an empire," Ethan said softly. "But I almost lost the only thing that truly mattered." Sarah squeezed his hand. Daniel smiled. For the first time in his life, he no longer felt incomplete. The poor student who thought he had nothing discovered he had a father. The billionaire who had everything discovered what he had been missing. And the impossible event that began with a drop of rare blue blood ended by healing wounds that money could never repair. As the city lights sparkled beneath the night sky, 3 lives finally reunited. Not because of wealth, not because of power, but because truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to rise. And after 22 years of darkness, a family finally found its way home.